and to one of our academic advisors, Anish Raghunandan at the London School of Economics, who is one of our speakers today, and to Anthony K. Bagley, our lead UK-based researcher, and also to Arlene Martinez, our communications director, who's at the controls, Phil Matera, our research director, who's the mastermind of Violation Tracker and Violation Tracker UK, and will be our first speaker. Agnieszka Chiganovic is a lecturer in finance at the University of Hull, and she'll be speaking after Phil, as will Professor Raghunandan, who is an assistant professor of accounting at LSE. Please be ready to ask your questions in the chat, and you can start asking them at any time, or raise your hand using the emoji at the reactions button on the lower right of your screen. And with that, Phil Matera, Research Director of Good Jobs First. Phil.
Thanks, Greg. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of the Violation Tracker UK site in case you haven't had a chance to look at it yet, and then talk about more generally about how both the US and the UK sites are being used by academics. So Violation Tracker UK is the first wide-ranging database of corporate misconduct in the United Kingdom. We've collected data from more than 40 regulatory agencies in England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. All of our data comes from official government sources, and each of the individual entries links back either to a government website or in a couple of cases to the results of open records requests that we made to agencies that did not post the data on their websites. We collected over 63,000 cases going back in most instances to 2010. We've got those cases have total monetary penalties of over 12 billion pounds, although there are many cases without monetary penalties because UK agencies make wide use of cautions and notices in which they basically slap the company on the wrist initially and don't impose any fine. We aggregate the results for a universe of more than 670 large parent companies, both publicly traded, privately held, even some not-for-profit. This is an overview of the types of cases that we have in the database. We tag each entry with one of 6 broad offense types, or offense groups, we call them. You'll see that the safety is the one with the largest number of cases. That includes workplace safety. Employment is second, and so on. But that's not necessarily the order of the financial penalty totals. The competition cases and the financial cases account for much higher totals. There are several ways of searching the data in the UK site. We have a basic search where you could just put in the company name by itself or combine it with an offense group or an agency name. We have a variety of summary pages for each of the parent companies, the industries in which the parents are located, the offense groups, the different agencies, and the different countries in which the parents are headquartered. We also have an advanced search page where you can mix and match lots of different variables to create a custom search. Here's an example of an individual entry involving a rather large financial penalty against Barclays, 284 million pounds. So as you can see, we give the basic information such as the date, 2 different levels of categorization, a narrative account of the violation, the agency involved, some information about the parent, and then at the bottom there's a link to the source that we use to derive this information, which in this case was a press release issued by the Financial Conduct Authority. Here's a list of the parents in the UK site with the largest penalty totals. Airbus is at the top because of a couple of large bribery cases. Nortel, which is no longer in business, but is still there because of a big pension case. And then some other familiar UK names, Barclays, Rolls-Royce, Lloyds Banking. So now I'm going to just say a few words about academic use of Violation Tracker, both in the US and the UK. You know, academics have been among the most avid users of the data. We make the data set available, the full data set available to many academics at no cost currently. You know, if you've used the site, you'll know that there are limits on how much you can download using the public site. So if you want to do any kind of comprehensive analysis, you need the full data set. And we've made that available to over 300 academics from 23 different countries. And here's a breakdown of the countries where the most requests have come from. Not surprisingly, the US is first and the UK. It's kind of interesting that Hong Kong is next. It seems like the people, particularly in the accounting field in Hong Kong, have really taken to this data, and we've gotten a significant number of requests from there. So far, we've gotten 10 requests for the UK data set. We expect that to increase substantially. We also did a quick breakdown of the disciplines for the academic requests. And you can see that accounting is first, and I think Anish is largely responsible for that because that's his field, and he's kind of spread the word among his colleagues about the US data source and now the UK data source, and we've gotten lots of requests from people working in that area. But then it's, you know, after that, business and management, finance, economics, etc. So I'll end there, and I'll be happy to answer any questions during the Q&A. Thank you.
Great. Next, we'll hear from Agnes at the University of Hull.
Thank you very much, Greg, and apologies for being slightly late. I think there is an issue with our link, so I'm not sure how many people managed to join us today, but I faced some difficulties. Anyhow, welcome everyone. My name is Agnieszka Trzeciakiewicz, and I'm a faculty member at the University of Hull. So I thank you very much, Greg, for letting me speak today in support of the Violation Tracker UK. A few words about myself. I do research in corporate finance, and I'm particularly interested in examining whether financial structures and policies which were originally designed to maximize wealth of shareholders come at the expense of employees, society, and environment. So as every researcher, I'm particularly concerned, of course, with the availability of the data. And as many of probably my colleagues, as well as Anish, we have been exposed to various sources like, data from major data providers, including MSCI, Bloomberg, and Thomson Reuters. But these resources are, largely unregulated. They lack transparency in their methods and offer coverage that is uneven. And they cause potential conflicts of interest then when it comes to policy recommendations. So even though there are attempts to regulate the indices, they will not come even close to what Violation Tracker offers us. So, Violation Tracker, as Anish is showing, as we are showing in our paper, it provides very clean and transparent, and what's most important, fact-based misconduct data. So there is no judgment involved in the way it is constructed and presented. So we have, I myself and my colleagues, Justin Kirkhope of Lancaster University and Monika Tersalewska of University of Exeter, we have very much benefited from the access to the US data in our paper available on SSRN, where we examine the risk-taking incentives which are embedded in the CEO compensation packages and workplace misconduct. So we find that there is indeed positive relation between the incentives and the level of misconduct, particularly in firms which have higher cuts to safety-related expenditures and that are under pressure to improve their performance. So thanks to Violation Tracker and the clean method of measuring the misconduct, we are able to provide some recommendation for policymakers, since in our view, or the results of our study suggest that penalties imposed by the regulators may not be sufficient to discourage the activities that result in workplace misconduct. So I view the Violation Tracker UK data as a great step forward towards the fairer future. Thanks to such a clean method, we are able to conduct more research and hopefully inform the regulators and protect us, protect employees of firms, and protect the entire environment. So thank you very much for Greg for an opportunity to give a shout out of support.
Thanks very much, Agnes, and we'll look forward to having more Q&A about details on that, but thank you so much. Next, we'll hear from Anish Raghunandan at LSE. Anish?
Sorry, I'm still muted. Okay, now I'm not muted. So yes, I want to thank Greg and Phil for giving me a chance to say a few words. So I'm Anish Raghunandan. I am on the faculty at the LSE. I've been a pretty avid user of the US version of Violation Tracker. And I have done a few basic analyses with the UK data as well, actually, kind of while it was in beta, although I haven't had a chance to write anything up into kind of an actual paper. So I thought today I would talk about, just in a few minutes, I'll give an example of one of the, I think, more practically relevant examples of some of the research I do with the data. And then I'll talk through what I've looked at with the UK data. And I also wanted to give a few sort of practical tips that I thought would be useful for academics specifically. And I'll try not to take too long, or Greg will yell at me. So we'll try to keep this short. So a lot of my work has to do, I kind of work in two broad fields. I do some work on trying to understand the financial determinants of kind of non-financial bad behavior, right? What is it that makes companies, what is it that makes companies mistreat their employees or pollute? What are they, assuming that companies are not just inherently evil, what are kind of, why would some companies, for example, try to underpay their workers? And in order to answer these kinds of questions, I won't go too much into this because Agnes just talked about some of her own work in this regard. In order to really understand firms like labor practices or environmental practices, commercial ESG scores aren't super useful. They pick up largely voluntary disclosures made by firms, but not what the firms are actually doing. And this is where Violation Tracker really shines through, because it's sort of a transparent and, more importantly, objective measure of what firms are actually up to. So you can see which firms are actually creating unsafe workplaces, which firms are actually engaged in sort of excessive pollution, which firms are screwing over their workers, engaging in wage theft, right? And if you want to ask questions dealing with what motivates companies and what are the incentives that companies take, or what are the incentives that drive companies to take these kinds of actions, it's important to properly measure the dependent variable. And that's really what Violation Tracker lets you do. And now I wanted to give another slightly different stream of research, but sort of related, that I think is also something that's becoming more and more of a big deal. And this is the ESG space. And so I have some work that tries to look at ESG from a slightly different angle. So for those of you who are more familiar with the prior work on trying to measure companies, kind of how socially responsible are companies, this work largely relies on commercial black box ESG scores, right? You've probably heard of KLD. You might have heard of like something called Asset4 or Sustainalytics. There's a lot of different data vendors floating around. But one thing that hasn't surprisingly really been asked until we did it was trying to figure out whether these funds are actually, these scores are actually conveying what they ought to be, and in turn, whether ESG-oriented funds are actually kind of making stakeholder-friendly investments. And the short answer is no. Funds that self-label as ESG do pick stocks with superior commercial ESG scores, but those are the same firms that have more labor violations, more environmental violations, right? They're picking the firms that are screwing over their employees the most. This doesn't seem super ESG friendly. And this is something that without violation tracker, you wouldn't have uncovered this, right? Because what's happening is there's a disconnect between commercial ESG scores and what companies are actually doing. And this is where kind of violation tracker really shines through, because you can see what companies are doing in a way that companies themselves can't really affect through voluntary disclosures or through data vendors relying purely on things like voluntary annual reports, right? So this is where violation tracker really shines through, right? To shed light on what's up with ESG investing in reality. And so with that said, those are a couple of examples of what I've done in the US. I wanted to talk a little bit about the UK setting as well. And I'll give a couple of things I've done and also a couple of practical tips. So big picture, I just talked about the lack of any relation between ESG scores and corporate misconduct in the US. I've done some correlations. I haven't had a chance to write anything up, but that broadly speaking, that same relation holds true in the UK. UK ESG scores also don't pick up UK corporate misconduct, right? So if you want to measure kind of what's going on in these companies, and for those of you based in the UK, you might remember the Boohoo scandal last year, right? Where Boohoo was found to be using essentially modern slavery in its factories in Leicester. And despite that, Boohoo was held by the vast majority of British ESG funds, right? And had high scores. And the reason for this was that these ESG scores and the funds that were using them as the basis for investment were purely going off of Boohoo's marketing materials, right? And this is where violation tracker can really make a difference. If you went to look into the employment tribunal records, if you went to look at the labor records, you'd see that there were some issues and you wouldn't have found this otherwise. And so violation tracker, for anyone who's interested in kind of pushing the ESG literature forward, pushing the literature on socially responsible investing and which companies are doing good and what is the role of investors in facilitating this, it's important to get measurement right. And that's what I think violation tracker really changes the game. There's also, if you run some univariate correlations, you can also see that there's some violating firms tend to underperform, they tend to be less profitable. If this were a non-academic audience, I could stop there. You guys are all academics, so I have to caveat that these are not causal inferences, these are correlations. But it's something worth knowing, right? Who these firms are, what they're up to, and how it differs from sort of these commercial ratings. And I wanted to kind of wrap up in just the last minute or two with a few practical tips, given that some of you are already users of the data, some of you may become users of the data, and some of you may be using the US data and not fully aware of all these things. So one thing that is that many researchers actually don't realize when they first get the data is that parent-subsidiary matches, and this is true in the US and the UK, are current, not historical. Now, this is for, and Phil can explain this better than I can, this is for reasons that essentially, for practical users of the data, you need these current parent-subsidiary linkages in order to trace a firm's past, right? So this is why things are the way they are. But if you're trying to look at what a firm was up to 10 years ago or 5 years ago, it's important to get the historical linkages as well. So some of you, if you work with the US data, you may have received my historical parent linkage in the US. We don't have one for the UK. That would be sort of separate of violation tracker, but it's something where if people are interested in building one, we should chat. The second thing I wanted to mention is that it's easy to merge the data to financial information. We have ISINs, and we have company numbers as well that we can give. So merging the data to financials is easy in the US, and I would argue even easier in the UK, given sort of the identifiers are cleaner over here. Finally, one thing that's also relevant to users of the data and trying to identify dates is that violation dates reflect penalty dates and not underlying violation dates. This is for practical reasons in that when our data sources largely only give us the penalty dates, right? Typically, when you look up a violation on the Environment Agency's website or the HSE's website, you see when the citation happened, but you don't get enough detail to tell you when the underlying violation actually happened. Now, this isn't always a big deal, right? In the case of something like workplace safety or wage theft, typically a violation is caught while it is ongoing, right? So just knowing the penalty date is perfectly fine. In cases of financial fraud, you may need to do some digging to figure out when the underlying action happened. Now, of course, for some applications, this doesn't matter, right? If you're just interested in how investors or how other parties respond to news of violations, you can and should use the data as is. If you're interested in, say, trying to model the determinants of a company choosing to engage in bad behavior, then it's important to realize this distinction. So I wanted to give kind of wrap up just with that, just with a few sort of practical tips for if you were going to use the data in academic research, what are some things to be aware of as you start to merge it with all the other data sources, look into it, use it, and so on. And I'm also happy to take any questions about this, and Phil can probably answer as better than I can some of the about sort of practical use questions.
So Anish, we have a clarifying question from two people already. They want you to restate the point you made about the existence of historical linkages for the US data. People so went through that a little too fast for some people.
Yes, yeah. So basically, Violation Tracker US and UK, right, have current parent subsidiary linkages. Separately, independent of Violation Tracker, I keep a database of historical parent subsidiary linkages, and it's about a year. I haven't updated in about a year, so Phil goes faster than I can keep up with. But it's based on, I'd say, sometime in 2020's version of Violation Tracker. So if you need the historical parents going back to 2000 for research reasons, that's something I keep, and I have shared with probably a couple dozen researchers at this point.
So it's our intention to add that to the website and to the full data set at some point, but we haven't done that yet.
We also have another question already queued up for you, Phil, and that is, someone said they look forward to the European Union version, and so you should explain our thinking on that one currently.
Yeah, so one thing we've concluded from looking at the UK data is that it's not practical to replicate this approach, country by country. There, particularly in the EU, the problem is that in certain areas, such as employment and environment, the cases are not centralized in the European Commission, and in the individual countries, these cases are often handled through the courts rather than through regulatory agencies. And it would involve an enormous amount of legal research to compile this information. So I think what we're going to do is explore a multi-country streamlined version of Violation Tracker as the next step. And we will take selected data from selected countries in order to populate that new database. We're also, we want to focus more on large publicly traded companies and less so on small privately held companies, which, based on just the total number of entries, the latter is kind of as a disproportionate share of the data, for example, in the UK site. And I don't think that those cases are as much of interest either to academics or even to most other users. So we want to try to focus the data more, both for practical purposes and for data collection purposes and for the benefit of users. And we're thinking of targeting about 15 large economies, about half a dozen or so of the larger EU countries, and then other countries, Japan, Australia, Canada, et cetera, to supplement that. And we'll have kind of this multi-country version of the database with a more limited scope. That's obviously going to take some time. That's something we probably will try to roll out over the next few years.
Phil, we've got a lot of questions piling up.
All right, let me finish. So I'm saying we will get to that when we can.
All right. So in which areas did the open information requests get brick-walled? Which agencies did not share information fully?
Well, we didn't, there was no case in which, we didn't file that many open records requests because we were in the UK, because we were able to get data from the websites. There were a couple that were slow in responding. I mean, we filed some where there was data on the website, but it wasn't easy to obtain. And so, for example, like with the health and safety executive, it wasn't easy to get it from the website. We filed a request. We didn't get a prompt response, so we ended up scraping the data from the website, and we obtained it that way. So I could talk privately about details about different agencies, but for the most part, we got what we needed.
I can maybe chime in with, there was one notable exception, which was the Equality and Human Rights Commission did tell us to get lost. They claim to have some, data on firms that haven't taken their gender pay gap seriously, and that some enforcement actions they've taken. They sent us a list of stuff with company names removed, so then we couldn't really do anything with it.
Anish, as long as we have you on the screen, when you say we have ISINs, do you mean Good Jobs First or you and your collaborators?
Good Jobs First. Or Phil can talk more. Phil can probably clarify that, but I believe the intention is to release it as part of the parent file that goes out.
It's not on the website, but if you request the full data set, you'll get a list of the parent companies with various identifiers, and the ISINs are included in that list.
Same question about CIK, Phil. Somebody noted that they got the data off the website, but it didn't have the CIK.
Same thing, if you request the full data set, you'll get a parent list with the CIK numbers for the publicly traded companies that are traded in the US.
Other question is the health and safety executive used as one of the sources? Yes, but Phil can say more. It's been criticized for underreporting and weak enforcement. They do not record all data. Occupational suicides are excluded, for example.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously included. In fact, it accounts for the largest number of entries in the UK site. With HSE and with all the other agencies, we could only gather data on cases that were reported by the agencies. If they either did not pursue cases or they did not make cases public, we were not able to include them.
Which types of violations are more likely to have a lag time between violation and penalties besides financial fraud? That could be for either Phil or Anish or Agnes.
I would say, I mean, big picture, the way I say it, there's two types of ways in which enforcement agencies behave, right? One is what I like to call outcome-based regulation, where if something's wrong, you get fined. It doesn't matter if you didn't mean to, doesn't matter if your intentions were good, right? If you have something unsafe in the workplace, you get fined then and there. The other is what I like to call intent-based regulation, which is, financial fraud is sort of quintessential example of this. But it's a case where you have to basically prove not just that something bad happened, but that the company had intent to deceive, right? Typically, you get this in the case of things like discrimination lawsuits. You get this in the case of things like, you might get this in some pollution cases, although for the most part, no. Financial fraud is the biggest example of this. So, but any agency that relies on a low frequency, high penalty amount, so like, competition cases, right? Anything that deals with sort of cartel behavior or collusion, you have to prove it, and that can take time. So I would say competition and financial offenses are likely to have a bit of a lag between when the underlying action took place and when the penalty is finally agreed upon, right? But the tell here is that if there's agencies that have infrequent violations, but really big monetary penalties for the handful of violations they do have, that's likely to be the case because you have to prove it to find a company that much money.
And let me add that in the US data, it's complicated by the fact that in addition to cases from the regulatory agencies, we have first a large number of cases from our Justice Department, and we have selected categories of private litigation, including class action lawsuits and multi-district litigation. And particularly with the latter, with the private litigation, there can often be a significant lag time between when the offending behavior took place and when the lawsuits are actually filed.
I just want to reiterate the exchange between two people in the chat to verify that yes, as in the US, in the UK database, the current relationships, the parent-subsidiary relationships are current. We should also add that about almost 400 parent companies show up in both databases, 329 of which are publicly traded. And if you get a search results page in the UK, you'll also have a link to the US search results page, and Phil's going to do the reciprocal US to UK links the next time we do an update of the US database. So you'll be able to get data on companies that are covered in both databases linked on the search results pages.
These are on the parent summary pages,
Thank you.
Not the search results pages.
I'm sorry, thank you. The next question, in the UK data, do we have violations that we can identify the violation start and end dates in addition to the violation date?
No. All we have is the penalty announcement dates.
Does it occur that in some cases, if you drill down to the original record, you would get more dates, Phil?
That's possible. I don't think you'll find it a lot, but
in some cases, yes. In most cases, no. I can I've spent a ton of time looking for this because it's super relevant to a lot of what I do. In a few cases, yes. In most cases, no. And the more kind of infuriating thing is that it's not systematic by agency, in the sense that it's not like for some agencies you can always get it, for some agencies you can never get it. It literally varies case by case, right? With an agency over time. There's no sort of, I spent a lot of time looking and I couldn't figure out any discernible pattern to when the data was available.
All right. I hope we're covering everybody's questions here, coming in fast and furious. Which case sources provided information about environmental related offenses? Now, I should add that in the chat box, Arlene just put in a link to the list of sources, the agency data sources, but I'll let Phil answer that question too. Environmental sources.
Yeah, well, if you want, I'll quickly share my screen and show you the, let's not take the time. The Environment Agency is obviously the one with the largest number of cases. There are a couple of smaller agencies that that are either more specialized, like the Oil and Gas Commission, although they didn't have too many cases. The agency that covers the privatized water services have a lot of cases, although it's kind of an overlap between consumer protection and environmental cases. There are smaller agencies like Natural England, and also there are separate environment agencies for some of the UK components, such as the Scottish Environment Protection Agency. But all of these are listed on that page where we show you the agencies and we link to the online sources that we use to collect the data.
All right, who has another question? I don't see any hands raised, so I'm working the chat box hard here. Just finally slowed down. We certainly encourage everybody to put their name and affiliation in the chat box if you want to share your participation today. And we also, if anybody has other published citations using the data, the US data, that they'd like to share in a link, we'd love to see that. We do try to keep up with published citations of people using our data, but as Phil explained, there's hundreds of them, so it's hard to keep up with everybody. We always like to hear from people using the data.
I also like to hear, if people have ideas about, either new sources for the UK site, or new features, or any way we can enhance the UK site. With the UK site, we've had it up for 6 years now, and not only have we updated it regularly, but we've added, greatly expanded the scope of coverage, and added other new features that we hope make the site increasingly useful. And we would like to do that for the UK site as well. So, for example, in the UK, we want to see to what extent we can add private litigation to the database. It's it's a little different because there isn't a developed class action lawsuit system in the UK. Things are kind of moving in that direction, but it's much less developed than in the US. There are things like group claims that we're looking into that are kind of the rough equivalent, and we will try to add those to the data set. So we will, so we're always looking for new sources of data that we can include. So if you have suggestions on any of those, please let us know, and we will try to incorporate them.
Arlene points out that on the issue of the environment, we expanded the record base by 52,000 records, including state environmental agencies. So yeah, the US database is about 5 times bigger now than it was when we first launched it 6 years ago, mostly because we've added about 250 more sources, largely at the state level, in addition to all the national federal sources that we originally had. Question, were you able to contact Ecocide, which we mentioned a while ago, or is that not an official enough source?
Of long distance flight, which you can trade like.
Okay, well, all of our sources are government entities, or in the US, we also use court dockets. So so we may consult other sources for leads on cases, but we don't use them as our actual information sources. So so I think I've looked at the Ecocide website. I think we will probably consult with them when we expand the coverage, particularly to the private litigation cases. And one of the categories we want to include are lawsuit, human rights, or other kinds of lawsuits that go beyond what the regulatory agencies do.
All right. A question: are UK trades unions using Violation Tracker, and do you have any links to UK-based financial journalists?
Well, we certainly hope the unions are. We had an event for them the other day, and there were some on that call, and we were certainly open to working with unions as well as other NGOs in with the site. We have talked to some financial journalists. When we launched, Thomson Reuters did an extensive profile of the new data site on one of their services. The publication called Byline Times in the UK that does kind of financial investigative journalism has done a series of articles using the UK data. And we certainly did our best to make financial journalists as well as other journalists aware of the website when we launched it. If any of you have contacts, I don't know, at the Financial Times or elsewhere, and want to put in a good word for us and urge them to take a closer look at the UK site and perhaps feature it in an article, we certainly wouldn't object.
I'll mention also, and I'm looking at Andy Agathangelou now from the Transparency Task Force, who was the original person in the UK who urged us to consider taking on this project, especially because in both databases, banks look quite unfavorable. They are the most penalized industry. We should, that's an important aspect of these databases, and certainly we urge that people seeking reforms of the Financial Conduct Authority and other regulators there in the UK make use of the data because of the evidence of recidivism. Andy, you want to make a point about that a second?
Thank you, Greg. I certainly do. I stumbled across Violation Tracker, obviously the US version, about a year and a half ago. And, it's really easy to fall in love with. What's not to like? It's free, it's massive, it's credible, it's fact-based. It's everything you could possibly want it to be as a reliable resource for campaigners and activists and journalists and academics and so on and so forth. I think the data within Violation Tracker works on two levels. First of all, it obviously gives very reliable information about corporate misconduct. That's essentially what it's all about. But it also enables you to kind of read between the lines. Particularly, it enables you to sort of see where the regulatory or governance framework applying to a different industry is failing. And this is absolutely crystal clear within financial services. So if you look at the data about the financial services misconduct, you very quickly come to the conclusion that the regulatory and environmental governance within the financial sector is failing. And you come to that conclusion because, quite literally, the same firms are being caught time and time again doing the same kind of thing. They do something bad, they get caught, they get told off, they get fined, and they carry on doing it as if it's actually a cost of doing business. And this points to deep-rooted cultural problems within organizations. And that's why campaigners like me and many other folk like us are using the data to actually try to shine a big, bright light on these deep-rooted cultural issues that really do need to change. Greg, you used the word recidivism there. The first time I heard that word was when Greg taught it to me about a year and a half ago. And Violation Tracker is a wonderful place to go to find that hard evidence of recidivism in all kinds of sectors, not just financial services.
Thanks so much, Andy. And somebody asked if they want access to the US historical parent subsidiary data, as mentioned, if that's something you can reach out to Anish about. And I'll speak for Anish and think I say yes. He's been very generous collegially with that. And Anish, obviously people can find your email quickly on your faculty website. If you'd like to put your email address in the chat box to expedite that, I'll leave that to you. More questions coming in here, and thank you for other people sending notes about work they've been doing with the data. Arlene has also put in the chat box links to some terrific investigative pieces that have already been done, especially by this great online publication you all have there called Byline Times. I think they've published at least 4 pieces already with different angles using the data, and they've been very enterprising, and we love it. And I've also put into the chat box, with his permission, a note from Yener Altubas about data compiled from US financial regulators a few years ago, together with some colleagues. And I see Anisha has put his email address in there. Thank you very much. And who has the next question or comments? Agnes, you should take the floor if something else has struck you.
Well, thanks, Anish. I think you explained very well the issues that we are all facing when we are starting to even think of empirical research in this area. So these linkages between historical and current subsidiaries are very, very important. I'm not sure what else can I add really to be Greg here, but if you have questions, I'm happy to answer. Of course, I will share the link to our work. We have also produced recently another paper on related to wage theft that draws on the Violation Tracker data from the US too as well. Yeah, so that's it from me. Thank you.
All right, great. Other questions or comments? Another question about the US data. Tony says he analyzes wrongdoing at community levels, so zip codes are very important. I noticed that in many cases, the detailed address data, for example, city and zip code, in the US data are missing. Are you planning to collect them gradually, or were there some particular reasons they were missing? Maybe some violations occurred across multiple cities? Phil?
Well, we currently have 496,000 individual entries in the US site. So if the address is included in the original source material, we capture it and present it in our individual entries and in the full data set. If it's not included there, we really aren't in a position to track down and reconstruct that information. So, for a few of the bigger agencies, for OSHA, for example, that the address information is available and we include that. But if it's not, we really can't reconstruct that. We realize that puts a limitation on some of the analyses that people can do, but we don't have unlimited resources. The other thing to keep in mind is that there are many cases in which the offense does not take place at a particular facility, at a particular physical location. This is true, for example, of a lot of the financial offenses. They may be company-wide, misconduct, so that there's no physical location that can make sense. And even when there is a physical location, there's sometimes an ambiguity in the source data as to whether the address that's given is the address of the facility where the problem occurred, or is the address of the headquarters of the company, which may be different from the address of the facility. So this is it's a challenging area, and the best we can do is to simply collect that information when it is made available in the source materials, and when it's not, it's going to have to be missing.
All right. Thank you, Agnes, for putting a link in the chat to your paper on CEO risk-taking and equity initiatives and workplace misconduct, published at SSRN. That's great. And somebody makes the point that byline times is not sufficiently well known yet, but it's growing rapidly. And we applaud them for making such enterprising use of the data and hope that that helps them improve their circulation. Other questions or comments? Still got a little bit of time. I know you aren't shy.
Well, while people are thinking, I want to let everyone know that we're in the process of redesigning the US site. The content will stay the same, but we're changing the kind of the interface, you might say, of the site along the lines of the UK site. So people will first see a basic search page, as in the UK site, where you can just put in a company name and get results, or combine it with for example, the agency involved or the category of the offense. Then we'll have a second page, which is kind of the equivalent to what is currently called option 1 on the site, with a link to the various summary pages and lists. And then we'll have an advanced search page that's equivalent to option 2. We felt a lot of users feel a little bit overwhelmed with having all those search options thrown at them right on the home page. So we're going to change that. And then the option 1 and option 2 designations was often confused people. So we're going to replace that with summaries page and advanced search page. That'll be coming before long, but the underlying content will remain unchanged, but will continue to expand. For example, one of the things I'm working on now is a new category of private litigation, product liability cases. And these are cases particularly involving the drug companies and the medical equipment providers. There are a number of these large settlements. I've only done a couple of dozen cases so far, and I'm already up over like $12 billion in settlements. So this is going to add a substantial amount to the US penalty total. And this work on the private litigation is very time consuming because we basically have to research each case individually, go through the court dockets, find the ultimate resolution of the case. And often that information is buried in there, but you know, we try to track it down and pull out the most important bits of information and create entries. And again, with links back to the court documents and other information.
Thank you very much, Jenner, for your feedback on that. Yes, we are the ones crazy enough to try to bring all this information from hard copies to spreadsheets. So Andy Agathangelou from the Transparency Task Force wants to preview some more trainings we have coming up and things like that. Andy?
Thank you very much indeed. So I'm going to try and share my screen if I may. So what you're looking at, folks, are the dates of the other launch briefings that we've got lined up. So obviously today being the 18th of November is the one about academics. Tuesday next week, we have one which is nuanced for civil society groups. Wednesday is a general interest session. Thursday, for those of you that have an interest in ESG investing, that's the one for you. Then on Tuesday, the week after, banks, pensions, financial services, then environment, then regulators, and who knows, there may be even more after that. So please do help us to spread the word. The simple reality is that the better the database is used, the more use it has, the more it can do, because the more interest there'll be, the more reference there'll be to it. And in a similar vein, I'd like, if I may, just to ask you to take a look at this, which is our fan base, if you like. These are the Violation Tracker UK comments of support we've received so far. There's some great users of the database who really are quite enthusiastic about it, including several people who are at today's session, including some leading academics like yourselves. Clearly, I guess there are two major success factors for Violation Tracker UK. One is how good the database is, and it's already fantastic. And secondly, how well known it becomes. And because we don't have lots of money to throw at this, it's really going to be about goodwill and word of mouth and people saying nice things. For example, there's a great one here from Monica and her colleagues and Kevin Hollin-Rake MP. Some of you may know Kevin. So I'll put a link to that in the chat. If you're inclined to want to provide something similar, then please do. The more good word of mouth energy we get around this, the better it's going to get known. The better it's going to get known, the more useful it can become. And it's already pretty damn good already. So thank you again. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. And Arlene has been putting in the database some information about, Good Jobs First has 3 other databases besides Violation Tracker and Violation Tracker UK. Our oldest database is called Subsidy Tracker. It's now 11 years old, and it tracks company-specific information about economic development subsidy awards from more than 1,000 national, state, and local government sources in the United States. And there's been quite a bit of scholarship using that data as well. And you can see some things there linked from Arlene. We also have another database called COVIDstimuluswatch.org. And these are all linked, by the way, on the front page from goodjobsfirst.org. But the COVID Stimulus Watch, which has been up for more than a year and a half, is specific to our COVID pandemic relief legislation, which continues to get enacted. 3 have been passed and another one's coming. And finally, we have a database called Tax Break Tracker, which is specific to places. We want a government accounting reform here, enabling people to look at the amount of revenue lost by state, but especially local governments, including school districts, to corporate tax breaks granted in the name of economic development. It's a big breakthrough. It's the only kind of spending through the tax code that has ever been codified under our generally accepted accounting principles. And let's see here, we got some more notes here. Thank you, Andy, for putting the link in on the support page. And Anisha is giving us more information also about that too. Thank you. And subsidy mashup, use of subsidy tracker data and mashup that Anish linked there. Thank you very, very much. major data nerd out here going on. That's wonderful. We're getting close to time. Anybody else, are there any unanswered technical or data questions, or where to go to get what, right? Anish has put his email address in the chat again. If you want to get the historical linkages on the US data or correspond with him generally about how he's been using the data. He is user number 1 on that list of 336 academics to whom Phil has given complete sets of the database. Nobody's been using it longer than he has. So he knows a great deal about both data sets, and we acknowledge again his support and Andy's support and Anthony's support and involvement on creating the UK database. It's been a huge team effort with lots of goodwill and lots of help and guidance. Phil, anything you want to say to wrap it up?
No, just that people can also contact me. My email address is on both of the databases, so you can find me, and I'd be happy to answer any follow-up questions people may have.
And again, we're all ears about adding new sources or making other enhancements to the data or sharing links between people on uses of the data. We really, that's how we grow here, and that's how we improve. So please send us all your feedback and ideas. Thanks so much. And with that, I think we can wrap it up. Arlene and Phil and Anish and Agnes, thanks again so much. And we'll see you in cyberspace.